I'm James Crawford Jr., and welcome to the first podcast of our lifetime, so to speak, that we're putting on. It's a podcast that we've thought a lot about. This is episode one, and we're naming it the Business of Law, a JC podcast. There's a lot of podcasts out there, a lot of people talking and yapping and going over a lot of different things. The purpose of this podcast really is to give you the information about practicing law, about the legal issues in society, things that come up that you may have questions about. And we're going to do the best we can. We have here today two people with us, our producers and directors, Garrett Weissel and Tyler Lewis. Hey guys, how are you?
Good, good.
They're here putting this together and pushing me in the direction we need to go. We're going to have some fun with this. This is some things that we're going to talk about. A lot of these episodes are going to last about 30 minutes. Some may go over, some may be a little bit less. And Garrett asked me a while ago, well, what do you want to make the first episode about? And I thought about it, and I thought, I'm really going to go with one of the things that I really feel like I know best. And it's such a huge factor in society and such a big issue that affects everybody on a daily basis. And I think these guys will agree that no one's ever accused me of being shy. Maybe 30, 40 years ago, but not today. So I'm going to tell you what I think and lay it out on the line and have some fun with it. And hopefully it's something that everybody enjoys. I certainly enjoy it. People have asked me, why are you doing a podcast? Well, number one, I like it. I like to talk about, things that interest me, and it gives me a way out and a reason for doing it. And, I think I'm going to come across with a little bit different angle about some things that you may have thought about, and stay tuned. So today we're going to talk about some very, very interesting things, something that I've lived with for, 30 plus years as far as practicing law. And that really has to do with sex offense cases, child pornography type cases, and how it affects people in our society. And lo and behold, last week there was a movie, or a couple weeks ago, called The Sound of Freedom that came out. It's a huge blockbuster, I said to my wife the other day, we got to go see it. And I thought it would be one of those things where you just go up on a Saturday night and get a ticket, walk in. But the movie theaters were sold out for a couple days about it. And apparently the producer and the script writer never expected this movie to take off like it has. In essence, the movie talks about sex abuse of children, about a total underground of pornography as a result of abducting children, putting them into sex slavery, and particularly about a detective who devoted his life to helping and saving children. And that may sound a little contradictory coming from a defense criminal lawyer, because after all, I have dealt with and represented and really, really focused on sex offense cases and a lot of federal and state child pornography cases over the years. And as Garrett said to me, what did you say to me the other day? He said basically, well, how does a defense lawyer put two and two together as far as this movie about children, which honestly broke my heart. It was a movie that you have to go see it. You almost have a duty to see it because it's such a big issue. But my point is that it pulls it together because, many times I do represent innocent people. And, to me, it's a subject that is near and dear to my heart because, sometimes, good people get accused of doing things that they just didn't do. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the movie, but we're going to talk about my background and history of sex offense cases and CP. But here's the thing that I think pulls it all together for everybody. Because after all, who's going to get some popcorn and a soda and sit down and watch Jim Crawford on a podcast talk about sex offense cases and talk about CP cases and about this movie. I mean, we only have a certain amount of time in life. But here's the thing I think it's going to pull it all together for people. And I really strongly urge you to talk to people in your family. It's this book. It's the second book I wrote. It's called An American Lawyer. It's been out for over a year, I think, now. And a lot of it's about business and about me as a lawyer, but there's some parts in the book that talk about something I developed, and I think I coined the term called the Trilogy Modum. And I coined it for a lot of reasons, and it's really broken down into three different areas that may have some relevancy here. And the first is basically, um, in the chapter, I talk about three items. The first is physical and sexual and emotional trauma. And by the way, the reason that I'm talking about these things is that it all ties back into many clients that I've represented and why some of these things have occurred. And I think when I'm done, it's going to all fall together for you. But the first issue of the Trilogy Modum is the physical, sexual, and emotional abuses that people have sustained in their life and how that plays a part in some of the decision making you make as time goes on. And sometimes it ends up in a situation where the U.S. attorney or the state's attorney's office happens to charge them with a crime. The second area of the Trilogy Modum is the adult children of alcoholics. And that is a subject near and dear to my heart. And almost everybody in society has heard about that term or heard that term, but not a lot of people really understand what that means and what it affects, what effect it has on individuals and families. The third issue and the third thing that I really believe ties all this in is I call it the permeation of porn in our society. You know, I think everybody can probably take a look at the screen and see that I wasn't born in 99. I've got a few decades on me. And so I have seen as a criminal defense lawyer and, as a politician and as elected member of various offices in Maryland over the years, I've seen the effect of what's happened with pornography in our society. And I will say this right now that as a defense lawyer, I believe the First Amendment means everything. And, we've actually represented people that have produced, valid pornography. And although I may not be in love with it, and I'm going to talk about that in a little while, I firmly believe that, you may not like it, but pornography is a part of our society to a degree, and you have the right to your expression under the First Amendment. So I'm not advocating in any way, shape, or form that pornography should be somehow or another abdicated or shot down from the skies in the world. It's not going to happen. First of all, it's silly. But what I am saying is that it has a profound effect on people, and I'm gonna get into that. And by the way, that decision and that thought process came to me over years and years of dealing with primarily men, believe it or not, some women, but families as well. But men that have been involved with pornography that eventually have been charged with crimes. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Jim, bullshit. Okay, how does that happen and what have you? Well, I'm going to talk, just kind of take a chill pill for a second because I'm going to tell you what I think. And I think by the time I'm done, you're going to have a real understanding. Now, why is that important to people? Well, listen, if you have a 12-year-old or 10-year-old, 8-year-old, or even 15, 16-year-old child in your home, you better be aware that they're looking at things that you have no idea that they're looking at. And I promise you, and the no dad or mom, or I'm not looking at that bullshit, okay? I'm just telling you right now that it's happening. And we're going to get into that a little bit and the effects that that may or may not have on society. So let's go back to really the first thing we were talking about as far as sex offenses in society and CP offenses. Let me clarify that for a minute. For a while, child pornography cases were a huge, huge thing as far as prosecutions in this country on a federal level, state level. And I have to say, over COVID, although I believe that it expanded from a societal functional taboo standpoint, a lot of the federal agencies and state agencies slowed down a little bit for a lot of reasons, for obvious reasons, in prosecuting and going out and looking. For a long time, the way that they prosecuted most CP offenders was people that downloaded material. It's basically the BitTorrent type program where people would share, and then the detectives would be able to go on and locate and find out who had it on their computer. Then they would send a subpoena to Verizon or Comcast or wherever the heck it is in the country, and they would then show up at your door at 4 o'clock in the morning, knocking on your door, looking at your computer and your electronic devices. That's how authorities normally dove in and were able to prosecute a lot of these. And believe it or not, when you're confronted at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, people have a tendency to spill the beans, so to speak. And these detectives and police, they know that. They're very good at what they do. In fact, I've represented many of them, and I know them, and they're very effective at their job. But that's what we're talking about as far as CP and even sex offense type cases. I've seen them for years where, sex offense matters or where someone's accused of a crime. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not, and it's a really, really big thing when someone makes an accusation like that. Today, as soon as you're charged criminally or even under an investigation, the apparatus of the complete police force, the federal agencies, the state agencies, the court agencies, they all jump into action. And it's almost like a huge boulder that starts going downhill, and it's very difficult to stop. And there are ways of stopping it. There's techniques. But in all seriousness, if you're listening to this because you believe that someone is going to accuse you or has accused you of something along those lines, don't talk to any police or any detectives. Don't talk to anybody. Consult a lawyer that knows what he or she is doing. I mean, make sure they understand what a sex offense means, and they have the years behind them in doing what they're doing. Because if you don't, it could be a potential problem for you. These cases all tie into the Trilogy Modum. And I really believe that the term Trilogy Modum eventually is going to be on the lips of many therapists and psychologists across the country, because the three things I just talked about and I outlined, meaning the trauma and the pornography and also the adult children alcoholics, when someone grows up in an atmosphere where those three elixirs are mixed together, it's a recipe for disaster. And believe it or not, if you read my book or just go online and look at it, the statistics of people that are subjected, and I mean kids primarily, and even adults, that are subjected to abuse, and abuse is a big term. I mean, everybody, wants to say that abuse this, abuse that, but guess what? Abuse does happen. It does, especially sexual abuse, and it happens, along with other types of abuse. So that and the thought process about the adult children of alcoholics. There was a book that was written called After the Tears, a really well-known book by Jane Middleton Moss and Lori Dwinell. That was written almost 35 years ago, and there's been updates to it. Fantastic book. And what that basically talked about was how individuals who have been subjected to parents, or it could be other siblings, it could be other family members that are subjected to any type of alcoholism or drug abuse. And they're even finding out that other thought processes, anything where people have addictive qualities, when they're subject to that, it creates a mindset in that person and that child. And in my book, I lay out a lot of it. And it's really, a lot of it's mimicked in the book After the Tears. It creates things like a fear of trust, the debilitating guilt to loyalty to a fault, hyper responsibility, sometimes the need to be perfect, need to be in control, always trying to please others, poor self worth, and many, many other things. But when kids are subjected to that, it creates a base, think of a computer program, it creates a base program where every decision is made through that lens, through that lens. And that means as far as skill and success, that means as far as moving on, as far as relationships, personal relationships, it means as far as jobs, as far as education, everything. And guess what? Look around at today's society. How many, and you hear the stories all the time, how many young men, and some women, but how many young men are still in the basements of their parents? You know, when you talk about getting a job, what does that mean? What do you mean get a job, right? And it's not that, you know, we all tend to want to say, well, what the hell's wrong with you? And, you know, this is your fault. You got to do this. You got to have ambition. Part of the problem is that these factors come into play and create that type of thought process. Now, not just the alcoholism or abuse in the household, but I'm going to say really pornography in many ways. Okay, let's talk about pornography for a minute. Again, you know, when I was a kid, guess what? There was Playboy. Okay, there was things like that. Now you have children who are 8 years old, 7 years old, 10 years old, that go on an electronic device and can instantly not only see an adult who is naked, but who have intimate sexual contact like you've never believed before. And think about what that does to that child's brain as far as creating a thought process about future relationships, about how things should be and how it shouldn't be. Now, there's a book written by Gary Wilson, and I personally think it's the best book out there. It's called Your Brain on Porn. Gary Wilson wrote it, I think, about 9 years ago. And frankly, I have to tout my own horn. If you buy my book or get my book, I have some chapters I think that really expand on that in a lot of ways. But here's his premise, and he broke through this. And by the way, here's Jim Crawford 10 years ago, 15 years ago, standing in federal court or a state court. And I'm saying to judges, when somebody has committed a CP offense or a sex offense, I'm saying, Judge, a lot of it's a pornography issue, and it's addictive. And they're all looking at it, they polite and say, yes, thank you very much, and very quickly stroke the pen and whatever. But very few people believed that it had any addictive qualities. Now, I think most people are not surprised. And in fact, you know, it's a thought process where you can actually be diagnosed from a therapeutic standpoint in the American Psychological Society that you could be addicted to pornography, very much like gambling or what have you. But back to Gary Wilson, you know, his thought process was, let's look at it from a standpoint of what it really does to society. Now, if I lined up 100 young men right now between the ages of 12 and say 30 years old, how many you think would say, you know what, I don't look at pornography, or I look at it once in a while, what have you? What do you think, Tyler?
Zero.
Zero?
Zero.
I think you're right, probably most. But the reality is that they don't, okay? And you say, well, so the hell what? What the hell difference does that make? And you know what? You would be right from the standpoint that for most people, it doesn't have an effect. The brain it's a placid scenario. Some people, they don't know why, it affects more than others. Now, you say, what do you mean effect? What does that have to do with anything? Well, first of all, in his book, you know, Gary took a lot of the neurological studies for the past 30 years, looking at sexual experiments, neurology experiments, and trying to figure out what's going on here. And he has a website too, and I think anybody who's listening to this, go to the website. It's fantastic. A lot of video, things like that. No sex videos, okay, but it is a video describing what pornography does to the brain, and hence the slogan, Your Brain on Porn. So what he talks about is, first of all, and I agree with this 100%, sex in our society is still a mystery. I don't care how much it's on TV and how much we think this, and we all know We all know the basics, right? But to many people, sexual abuse or sexual contact is so different. It can create major problems for people and sending them in the wrong direction. But what he talks about basically is the fact that I'll give you the example that he gives in the book. He talks about what happens when a normal male and female young people get together to have some sort of sexual activity. Well, he says, well, the male gets excited, there's an erection, and they have sex, and what have you. He referred to a Harvard study called the Coolidge effect, where basically you had a rat in a cage, and you put a female in the cage, and you entice the male to have sex, and that male will go at it like you wouldn't believe initially, and will have sex with that rat, the female rat, very quickly and alive. But very quickly, what happens is the male rat becomes disillusioned and becomes tired. In order for our species to continue to grow, okay, in our DNA, it's built in our brain that we want novelty. Okay, we want novelty. So the male mouse or rat is in there tired. You take that female out because he doesn't want to have sex anymore. You introduce a new female. Guess what? Under the Coolidge effect, it basically says he is like ready to go again. He will find a way to make that happen, and that's how the species propagates. Well, in order for that to happen, the dopamine feature has to come into play, meaning that there has to be some reason why that occurs, and that's the dopamine is the to-do drug. It's not people think it may be like a feel-good drug. It's not. It's basically a secretion in the brain and in the body that gives people incentive to do something. Go do your homework. Go work. Go make something. Go have sex. Whatever it is, that's what occurs. And based upon the Coolidge effect and the dopamine effect, he has talked about how pornography does the same thing to the mechanisms in the male brain. We're not stupid. We can look at a computer and say that's not real life. But our brain, the primitive components, look at that two-dimensional scenario and everything goes into effect as if it's real life. So when a typical young person or young male looks at pornography, the Coolidge effect, the dopamine, and the desire to continue to look at image after image after image is there. That's why I'd heard from many people say, Jim, I get lost looking at pornography. Next thing I know, I look up, it's 5 hours later, and also the high speed. And by the way, high speed pornography and high speed internet changed everything in this country. Looking at images versus high speed pornography. Because people would do the jumping effect where they go from image to image to image, and it's called escalation. Okay, so if you ever notice, if you go to any kind of commercial porn site, by the way, I saw about 6 months ago, I actually saw a sign that had in Times Square Pornhub. So now you have Pornhub being advertised in Times Square out in public. This is what it's come to. It's a very public thing now. But if you go to, like, say, a Pornhub, look at the different generic type things that you can look at. It is not like just basic stuff. It is swinging on chandeliers. It's crazy, upside down, this and this. And I'm not going to mention the specific types, but what that does is it puts them in a position where they can escalate. Okay, they're smart. They know what happens. It's like a sales pitch. If you look at one thing and you're using the dopamine will run out with rat female number one. If you go to another image, that dopamine re-ups. Okay, you give another squirt, and so on and so on. And basically, the escalation will occur until people sometimes are looking at things like, what the hell am I looking at? I never really intended, I don't like that type of sex, but it's just things that it's almost like a car accident in many ways to get that dopamine. So, and this was part of my description in a lot of child pornography cases where I would see men, and by the way, most of the cases with child pornography, most, not all, are people who are very well accomplished in life. And they have been very successful. And you ask them, what the hell were you thinking? I think, I wasn't. I don't even know how I got, I mean, I'm not interested, Jim, I'm not interested in having sex with a child. I don't know how I got to image A to image Z. Now, don't get me wrong. There are people, unfortunately, in this world that want to look at children and cause children problems. That's a different issue. I'm talking about the married man or non-married man or someone who's very, very professional who doesn't know how they got into that situation. And the problem is that our laws on the state level and the federal level are so draconian. They do not distinguish between that type of person who's never had a criminal speeding ticket in their life, but all of a sudden find themselves caught looking at this kind of silly stuff, and people who are habitual or really are pedophiles who really are looking to cause harm to society and children. So that's, I got to be honest, that's one of the reasons why I've been so successful in many ways. I've been able to distinguish between that type of person and, quite frankly, the way I convince, or my attempts, let's say, to convince a judge or a jury or even a state's attorney or prosecutor about this person's intent means everything. You know, I'll tell you a quick story. I remember years ago, I was in front of a judge in one of our counties, and we were going to sentencing regarding a CP case, and the state's attorney stood up and she said something to the effect, you know, Judge, this is why pornography continues, CP continues, because this defendant, Mr. Crawford's client, is looking at this and perpetuates it and makes it happen. Well, for lack of a better term, I didn't use this exact word, but I still said bullshit. Okay, my client did not cause pornography to be created. But my point is that you see the thought process. If you're charged, or it's a thought process about you being charged, then you're going to be in a situation where the whole world's against you. But it's very, very important that we break this down, and that's why I did it in my book. So pornography is a huge issue and a big part of the Trilogy Modum as far as what's happening. Now, why is that important? You know, why should you even give, you know, my words a second thought? Well, I'll tell you why. Because, you know, I've got 4 children. My kids are grown. But there's a lot of kids out there and a lot of young adults who have absolutely no incentive. I have never seen more young men who have no incentive to really do a whole lot of anything. Now think about this. If you read Gary Wilson's book, if you are looking at pornography every day, several times a day, and by the way, the phones, it's not just, you know, it's not just on the computer at night or in some, it's 24/7. I remember I had a case not long ago before I kind of stepped back from handling some of these things, where I had a fellow who had to have pornography on 24/7. It was like background music to him. I mean, no kidding. He listened to it more than he watched it. But the addictive quality's there. So why is it important? Well, you have to find a way to back these kids out of this thought process about pornography. The good news that Gary Wilson talks about is that you can have your brain go back to its original thought process. His argument is that when kids are looking at high-speed pornography from the time they're very young until their time in their early 20s, it creates new pathways. And that's the way our brain works. You know, if you're left-handed, you want to start doing things with your right hand, you have to create new pathways. You know? And so his argument is, and he's seen it many, many times, stop the pornography, stop looking at it, and your brain's going to go back to where it was. And as a matter of fact, there's a whole group of people you can join on his website and other websites that help people through the addiction of CP. I don't know if not CP, but regular pornography and what have you. So why is it important? It's important because young people and young men need to find their way back to what's happening. Now, I've taken it further and developed the thought process of the Trilogy Modum. I really believe that all three of those components mixed together have created an elixir in our society that is unbelievably devastating. You know, drug use, alcoholism, pornography, and other types of abuse are just prevalent. And if it's not addressed, think of it this way, like I mentioned before, it's like a computer program going on and on and on and on. You're just looping. And in my book, I talk about how to get out of that loop. You know, next thing you know, you're 40 years old, 50 years old, and you're making decisions based upon these things that were created for you as a young person. And the unfortunate thing about it is that most people can't get past that. I do have a chapter in there talking about how to get out of the trilogy modem and the steps there too. So um, don't underestimate this. This is something that has taken away the vigor and zeal of many, many people and really ruined many, many families. If your child just doesn't seem to have any incentive, look there, look at that type of thing. I had a kid, I guess a little while ago. It's been a few years, who was charged with a sex offense, and he was probably 18 years old, and the female was probably 16 or 17. They met in high school, and one day they decided to go after school way back in the back, past the baseball fields. Nobody was around, and they were kissing and making out. And he was rather inexperienced sexually, and so was she. And they started, touching each other and things like that. And she got undressed, he got undressed, and he started spanking her, like really spanking her hard. And although they boyfriend girlfriend, they weren't for years, and it really spooked her, scared her. She ran, right? And so next thing you know, she basically said that he assaulted her and what have you. So I'm meeting with the kid in my office. I said, now I kind of knew the answer, but I said, what are you doing? What are you spanking her for? She said, Mr. Crawford, that's what girls like. Now, where did you get that from, right? I mean, and I'm just breaking the initial tally on that. There's so many other things that have caused that thought process. At the end of the day, okay, the biggest loser with all this is the person that gets charged criminally, but also if you never get charged criminally and you're never involved in this, is intimacy, the word intimacy. If you read The American Lawyer, I talk about my journey in life, about how I tried to overcome a lot of these thought processes. I grew up in an environment, you know, um, uh, somebody very strong-willed father, a lot of alcohol, a lot of things of that nature that had a profound effect on me in some good ways, but a lot of bad ways. And it took me years to try to figure out what was going on there. I urge anybody listening to this, I don't care if you're being investigated, been charged, been convicted, really look at this from the standpoint of what caused this behavior. What is its foundation, and how does it happen? You know, um, there's more I could talk about as far as pornography, but if anyone wants to look more into it, read my book. There's many other books, but I urge people to get the book I talked about, Your Brain on Porn. Now, let's go back and circle back to the movie, The Sound of Freedom. You know, all this taken into consideration, and you know, and let me be clear, it's so horrible because I know a lot of them, the children that are abused, and believe me, it's out there. It really is. But I also know that there's a lot of people that are accused of things that are not guilty of what they're being accused of. So, in an environment like this, can you imagine being charged right now with child trafficking or child abuse? What are the chances of someone on that jury seeing that movie? And think about what it does with, you know, um, judges and prosecutors, politicians. When's the last time you went down to Capitol Hill walked into the Capitol building, saw a debate, and you saw somebody standing up for the rights of people who are charged with child pornography. I mean, it's just not going to happen, right? People are afraid to do it. Officials are afraid to do it. So I hate to say it, but it's true. You know, I'm a big believer. Lawyers are the people that stand between people accused of these things and the government, and you know, really truly trying to understand it. So I would urge people to take steps looking at that and doing what needs to be done. And I have an email, James at jamescrawfordlaw.com. If somebody wants to write to me to help, I can probably point you in the right direction. Or if you do have a legal issue, obviously you can contact my office, and you know, someone will talk to you about the next steps in trying to help you through what you're going through. So I hope that was somewhat informative about the events and what I believe is a big deal as far as sex offense cases in CP. So on to the next. Gentlemen, thank you so much for helping with the production. We'll get into some other things next time. So I enjoyed it. Hopefully other people did. We'll see. So have a good one, and I'll talk to you next time.